It was just another busy day at that luxury store. Elegant customers paraded through the aisles, admiring showcases full of sophisticated pieces. The sellers, always attentive, hurried to serve those who appeared to have the most money. But no one noticed the man who entered discreetly, wearing simple clothes and holding a cane that was worn out by time. His face bore marks of wisdom. His eyes observed every detail around him. He wasn't there to buy anything, at least not in the common sense of the word. With slow steps, he walked through the room, lightly touching some fabrics, admiring the cuts and finishes of the clothes on display. It didn't take long to notice the suspicious looks that were turning towards him. Employees whispered among themselves, while snub-nosed customers twisted their faces in disdain. The truth was cruel. In that environment, his appearance made him invisible. A tall and imposing security guard crossed his arms as he observed the scene. His sharp eyes did not hide his suspicion. With each passing minute, his impatience grew. After all, what was an old man dressed so humbly doing there? He didn't seem to have money to buy even a button of the shirts displayed on the glass shelves. For him, that man was just a nuisance that needed to be removed as soon as possible. And that's when the inevitable happened. The security guard approached and, without the slightest trace of courtesy, stopped in front of the elderly man. His tone was dry, harsh, full of contempt. "You need to leave. This store is no place for people like you." The silence that followed was suffocating. The elderly man looked up, looking at the security guard for a few moments. There was no anger on his face, just a discreet, almost imperceptible sadness. Without arguing, he turned around and walked slowly towards the exit. No employee tried to intervene. No customer questioned what had happened. The glass door closed behind him, and the store continued its rhythm as if nothing had happened. What no one knew was that man was in fact the founder of that brand. The man who, decades ago, had started everything from scratch with his own hands. And now, humiliated in his own empire, he discovered a painful truth about what his company had become. What will happen now? Will this error have consequences? In the next few moments, you will see how a simple act of contempt can change the fate of an entire company. The movement in the store continued intensely. Well-dressed salespeople glided through the space, offering the best products to customers who, at first glance, seemed to have money to spend. The elderly man, on the other hand, was an uncomfortable contrast in this luxurious setting. He walked slowly, his trembling hands sliding over the fine fabrics, while his eyes observed every detail with a mix of nostalgia and disappointment. That was his creation, his legacy, but no one there seemed to recognize him. On the other side of the room, the security guard continued to watch him with suspicious eyes. Her gaze narrowed when she saw him take a jacket from one of the racks and analyze the stitching carefully. For him, that was already a clear sign of a problem. He didn't know who the man was, but he was sure he didn't belong there. Making a decision, the security guard adjusted the black suit he was wearing and approached the elderly man, interrupting his assessment of the jacket with an impatient tone. "You need to leave." The elderly man looked up, surprised by the approach. "Forgiveness? I can already see that you can't afford to buy anything here. We don't want customers to feel uncomfortable," continued the security guard, crossing his arms, as if that were a definitive order. The elderly man stared at the man for a moment, trying to understand if this was really happening. He gave a small, sad smile and ran his fingers through his jacket one last time before placing it back on the rack. "I was just looking. This is no place to look. Either buy it or leave," the security guard said, taking a threatening step forward. The conversation attracted the attention of some vendors, who were observing the scene from afar, but none of them intervened. On the contrary, there was a certain hidden satisfaction on their faces. It was as if this was a necessary cleaning in the store's sophisticated environment. The elderly man took a deep breath and nodded slightly. He didn't want any fuss. I had already seen and lived too much to know that arguing at that moment wouldn't be worth it. Then, with a tired look, he began to walk slowly towards the exit. The footsteps echoed on the marble floor as he walked away, feeling the looks of contempt and indifference fixed on his back. When he reached the door, he looked inside the store once again. The shine of the windows, the sophistication of the clothes, the grandeur of the space. Everything was the result of his work. But now, faced with the treatment he had just received, he wondered if it had really been worth it. As he pushed the glass door to leave, he heard the security guard whisper to one of the salespeople, "These clueless old men think they can get in anywhere." And then the door closed behind him. Little did they know that they were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. The buzz in the store continued as if nothing had happened. Sophisticated customers still strolled among the racks. Employees continued to serve only those they deemed worthy of their attention. And the security guard, proud, maintained a rigid posture near the entrance, satisfied with having solved the problem. For him, expelling that elderly man was just another task of the day, a small detail in the midst of the routine of keeping the store free of any unwanted presence. But the silence that fell a few minutes later completely changed the atmosphere. The glass door was pushed open abruptly, and a man in an elegant suit hurried in, his eyes sweeping around the room as if looking for someone. He had a tense, almost desperate look on his face. His breathing was rapid, and he was holding the cell phone in his hand tightly. The manager, who was talking to one of the salespeople about a new collection, raised his eyebrows when he saw him enter. "Mr. Ricardo, everything is fine?" asked the manager, surprised by the man's agitation. The executive ignored the question and got straight to the point. "Where is he?" The manager frowned. "Who?" "Mr. Mario, the founder of the brand," Ricardo exclaimed, without patience for beating around the bush. "He came to this store today. I need to talk to him now." The silence that followed was like a punch in the gut for all the employees. The sellers looked at each other, confused and scared. The security guard, who until then maintained an expression of superiority, felt the blood drain from his face. "Founder?" The manager swallowed. "Was Mr. Mario here?" "Yes, and he told me he wanted to visit the store in disguise." Ricardo looked around impatiently. "Has he been attended to yet? How was he treated?" One of the salespeople cleared his throat and tried to hide his nervousness. He's already left." Ricardo's eyes lit up in warning. "How did it come out? Did you even know it was him?" The manager felt his forehead sweat. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his tie, trying to maintain his composure. "Well," he hesitated, his voice trailing off. "The security guard asked him to leave." "What?" Ricardo practically shouted. Everyone froze. The security guard, who until then had remained silent, felt his body stiffen. I didn't know who he was," he stammered, trying to justify his attitude. Ricardo put his hands on his head in disbelief. "Did you expel the man who created this brand? Who is responsible for all this?" The silence was almost deafening. The weight of the situation fell on everyone like an avalanche. What once seemed like a banal attitude now became a colossal mistake. "He left not long ago," murmured one of the salesmen, his voice trembling. Ricardo took a deep breath, trying to calm down. He needed to act quickly. "If he's still nearby, I need to find him. Now." The manager gestured to the security guard. "Go after him." But the security guard, who until minutes ago was full of arrogance, was now pale and paralyzed. He didn't move. "I couldn't." What would happen now? What would be the consequences of this unforgivable mistake? One thing was certain. No one in that store would ever forget that day. The store, which minutes before was buzzing with a frantic movement of customers and hurried employees, was now filled with a tense silence. The air felt heavy, charged with expectation and fear. The manager, salespeople, and security guard were anxiously awaiting the outcome of the situation. Ricardo, the executive who had arrived out of breath moments ago, was outside, looking at the street as if expecting a miracle. And the miracle came. The glass door opened again, and the same elderly man who had been expelled minutes before entered. But now he was not alone. Behind him, 4 men in suits entered with firm steps, their expressions closed and their gazes hard. They were the company's directors, summoned in a hurry as soon as the error was discovered. The manager's heart skipped a beat. He felt his throat dry up when he saw the scene. The vendors were motionless, and the security guard, well, the security guard seemed to have shrunk into his own uniform. His face was white as paper. The elderly man stopped in the center of the store and observed everything around him. He glanced at the vendors, the windows, the service counter. Everything was still as he had left it, except for one detail, the atmosphere of fear in the air. He let out a sigh, crossed his hands in front of him, and then spoke, his voice serene but heavy. "So, this is how you treat your customers?" No one had the courage to respond. The employees lowered their heads. The manager tried to open his mouth, but no words came out. The elderly man continued. "Many years ago, when I started this company, I had nothing. No money, no influence. Just a dream and a lot of work. I spent sleepless nights, sold what little I had to open my first store. And now, after everything I've built, I enter my own establishment and am treated like an invader." He turned his gaze to the security guard, who felt his legs wobble. "You didn't even ask me if I needed help. He didn't even greet me. He simply judged me by my appearance and kicked me out." The security guard stammered. Sir, I didn't know. What if I wasn't the founder?" Interrupted the elderly man, his voice firm. "What if it was just any customer? Would that make your attitude more acceptable?" The silence was overwhelming. The elderly man then looked at the manager. "And you? Do you train your team to act like this?" The manager broke out in a cold sweat. "Mr. Mario, please, it was a misunderstanding." "No, it wasn't," replied the elderly man without raising his voice, but in a sharp manner. "It was a reflection of the culture that's settled here. Employees who judge customers before they even know who they are. An environment where appearance is worth more than character. Where respect does not exist. That's not what I built." The directors behind him looked at each other, and then one of them stepped forward, addressing the manager with a cold tone. "Mr. Mario shouldn't have to go through this to find out what happens in our stores. And from what we saw here today, changes will be necessary." The elderly man took a deep breath and announced, "From now on, this store will be redesigned. The service policy will be reviewed, and all staff will undergo rigorous training. But before all that," he turned to the security guard, "you're fired." The man froze. "Sir, please. I'm sorry. I didn't want. If I had done this to another customer, I wouldn't even think about apologizing," interrupted the elderly man. "It's done." The security guard swallowed hard and lowered his head, knowing that nothing he said would change that decision. The elderly man then looked at the sellers. "And as for you, I hope you learned your lesson. Respect should not only be given to those who look rich. Respect must be given to anyone who enters here." The manager quickly nodded. "We will make all the necessary changes, Mr. Mario. You have our word." The elderly man sighed and took one last look at the environment. "I still love that brand. He still loved what he built. But I knew I needed to remain vigilant, because success can easily turn into arrogance when values are forgotten." He turned around and left the store, leaving behind a team that would never make the same mistake. And a lesson that would echo for a long time. The repercussion of what happened was overwhelming. Within days, the story of the elderly man thrown out of his own store had spread like wildfire. Someone who was present at the moment of humiliation recorded part of the scene and posted it on social media. The video clearly showed the security guard approaching the elderly man in a rude manner, followed by the moment in which he simply turned and left without resistance, carrying in his eyes the disappointment of someone who had just witnessed the decay of his own dream. In the comments, the public's indignation was unanimous. How could someone be treated like this in their own company? Imagine how many other customers went through this without anyone knowing. This is a reflection of the society we live in. If you don't look rich, don't you deserve respect? The pressure was so intense that the company had to issue an official statement. In a video published on the brand's official profile, Mr. Mario himself appeared, sitting in his office, with a firm look and an expression that mixed seriousness and regret. "I never imagined that, after so many years, I would need to remind my own company about such a basic value: respect." He paused, letting his words echo in the minds of those watching. What happened in that store was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of something much bigger. And I refuse to allow my brand, which I have built so hard, to be tarnished by this type of behavior. The company directors were at his side with serious expressions. Therefore, we are implementing immediate changes. All employees will undergo customer service training. No longer will anyone be judged by their appearance when they enter one of our stores. And more than that, I want this story to serve as a lesson for everyone. He leaned his body forward, looking directly into the camera. Never judge a customer by the clothes they wear. A person's true value is not in an expensive suit or a designer watch. It's in what she represents, in what she did, in what she does. The video went viral within hours. Influential personalities shared, newspapers reported, old customers left emotional comments. This man deserves respect. This is how you lead a company. Finally, a businessman who doesn't hide and takes responsibility. While the internet was buzzing with the story, changes were visible within the company. The store where it all happened underwent a makeover. The manager was removed and new leadership took over, with a clear mission to ensure that service changed. Employee training was intensified, and this time, Mr. Mario himself insisted on participating in the first session. In front of a group of salespeople, he spoke with the same firmness as he demonstrated in the video. When a customer walks through that door, you don't know who they are, where they came from, or what their story is. But they know one thing: he deserves respect. The employees nodded silently, absorbing every word. In the end, the company not only corrected its mistake, but became an example of overcoming and learning. And Mr. Mario, with all his experience and wisdom, knew how to transform a moment of humiliation into a lesson that the world would never forget. And so, we come to the end of this video. If you like the story, don't forget to like and share with your friends. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos. Until next time.